So this next chapter is on a huge area in sociology and in social work regarding families and family life. The big questions for this chapter include: what is family? Why has family become a topic of such heated debate? What challenges do we face as we develop relationships and balance family and work life? What is it like to grow up in the 21st century family? And finally, what social policies around the world best support changing families? Now keep in mind that these questions will be on the test, and they'll be some from the readings that you won't know about till you actually get to the test. So what is family? This is a difficult question to answer. Depends the time and both in terms of history and where you are on the globe. From a global long-term historical perspective, the independent homemaker breadwinner household is relatively rare, and modern short-lived arrangements. Essentially, the whole role of family is changing. Prior to the rise of modernity, that is modern day, arranged marriages, polygamy, multi-generational households, and continue in some non-Western cultures. So it's very different than the nuclear family in Western culture like the United States. After World War II, traditional homemaker, breadwinner household families became more common, and this was affiliated with the rise of the middle class. Today, the array of family forms is very, very different. Kinship systems are systems that involve relatives, but do all relatives or all people in a household, are they actually related to each other? Who do you consider to be part of your family? Most people would say blood relatives, but that also includes other people as well. Demographers refer to family as a group of people who live together in households and share legal ties. Anthropologists see it a little bit differently. They see family as kinship systems, that is, systems of relatives all living within a community. And sociologists conceive family as social institutions with many, many dimensions. Kinship systems and residence patterns vary. Families consist of networks of kin extending beyond the nuclear family, including fictive kin, which might be someone who's like a non-relative but considered a relative. They can be inherited and created through marriage or through some legal action. They are mapped in any given society. So if you do genealogy work or know what that is, they map the course of people's families. They're less concerned about intermarriage with kinship groups within a larger society than in smaller societies. So in larger societies, they're not as nearly as problematic and studied as in small societies that depend on kinship ties. They may consist of half and step siblings, which is a relatively new phenomenon to the 20th century, and social and biological parents. They may be linked through differences in ethnic and class cultures. So, for example, if you live in a Lithuanian community versus an Italian community, those types of kinship patterns may be important, including where you live at. So if you live in Wilmette or you live in somewhere in a rural area of Illinois. Question 2, why has family become the topic of such heated debate? Well, that's a good question. Mostly involving around economic restructuring. It's not necessarily a change in family values as much as it is the fact that in Western culture, economics are really important for survival. It changes the family. There's an erosion of the foundation of breadwinner, homeowner family caused by social and economic forces that require new family arrangements. This is pretty obvious during the COVID outbreak, how economic changes have affected not only families, but the whole fabric of Western culture. There's also blurring gender boundaries. The rise of a dual earner family, that is mom and dad both working, and a new emphasis on individual choice and self-reliance are inescapable consequences of a new economic order. So skill sets and the types of behaviors that you're trained to engage in often determine what the family looks like. Gender restructuring perspective is important. There's an interdependence of paid and domestic work and growing mismatch between job structure and caretaking needs of families that underpin this perspective. So growing conflict is created between how to resolve competing needs and values, typically often resulting in some type of compromise. Opportunities and uncertainties distributed differentially across families in different classes and in different ethnic subcultures. Question 3, what challenges do we face as we develop relationships and balance family and work? In 21st century United States, it's very different. In American culture, many of the family values are based on creating lifelong commitments, retaining some measure of personal autonomy at the same time. Mothers, fathers, and work family can create conflict, and sometimes the lines are blurred between home and work. Families now in conflict with the wider world, especially the world of work. So being called back into work or having mandatory overtime, those sorts of things can cause both marital and family problems. Mothers are often responsible for unequal, what Hochschild called the second shift, because not only do they take care of their out of the home work, but also work at home. And it can produce a scarce economy of gratitude. Couples' combined work time varies. The combined work time of whole families has risen dramatically. That's one thing about Americans, is they're not afraid to work. Dual earners and single parents are most affected. If you're a single parent, that means that not only do you have to work outside the home, but you also have problems with child care and finding any personal time for yourself. Future of family well-being will depend on restructuring jobs, child care to help workers. Often when there are cutbacks, they're often seen in cutting back child care. The combined work time has risen dramatically. Dual earners and single parents are most affected, and the future of family well-being will depend on restructuring jobs and child care to work. So keep that in mind. Question 4, what is it like to grow up in a 21st century family? Well, we're just finding that out. There are challenges facing in the face of childhood, including fluid marriages, unpredictable finances, moving from one geographic part of the country to another, mothers with new work ties that will actually shape the experiences that a child has growing up, including mothers working outside of the home or telecommuting. Children do not suffer when mothers work outside the home if the mother is satisfied with her situation and the father or others are involved in the child care. Divorce has a profound impact on children. Children living with both biological parents fare far better on average, but differences in decline is related to family financial resources, the degree of parental conflict before and after a breakup. So if mom and dad get along, the divorce has less of an impact than if they continue to fight after the divorce. And typically, financial resources are the main issue with divorcing parents. The sleeper effect basically refers to um, uh, the loaded effects of divorce down the road. So at some point, a child who has gone through one or two divorces with their parents, it may impact them differentially. When they become an adult, uh, things are expected out of you, like completing formal schooling is highest on the list, becoming employed full-time is second highest, being able to support a family, becoming financially independent, moving out of the parents' home, getting married, and last on the list of things that people say are important life events include having your own children. There are some benefits to early adulthood, including more time to pursue independent goals, making lifelong commitments, fuel to the gender revolution in young women and men's aspirations and plans. There are some fallback strategies. Women are more likely to see paid work as essential to own and family survival, and prefer self-reliance over economic dependence. So there's a built-in fallback strategy, and men are more likely to worry about costs of equal sharing and preferred neo-traditional arrangements. Question 5, what causes inequality among families? Well, as you might have guessed it, um, their share of never married, um, by race, ethnicity, and education. So once again, it falls along the same inequalities we've been talking about, with white, the gray line here, black, the blue line, and Hispanic, the yellow line. So this is by race and ethnicity. Its share of never married is highest among blacks. By education, it is high school is the gray line, some colleges the yellow line, and the dark blue line is some college. So you can see that both race, ethnicity, and education affect the outcome. There are parenting differences, and I've included a discussion in the course information on parenting styles. LaRue looks at the circular link between class culture, especially child rearing practices, and the transmission of inequality from one generation to the next. So basically, people in different classes raise their families differently. People in the upper class raise their children differently than kids in the middle and lower class, parents in the middle and lower class. Middle class families practice intensive parenting and concerted cultivation. Working class families, it's a natural growth of unstructured play and leisure. And of course, they have shared values and practices, including the standard of intensive mothering and a high value on motherhood, which may not be seen in people in the upper class families. That's not to say that people in the upper class families don't value their children, they just value them differently. Growing up in a lower middle class family, we spent much of our time, just as an example, in very unstructured play. I don't ever remember in my childhood being on an organized team. But nowadays, especially in middle class, rural Illinois, it's just the opposite. Inequality and intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender. Hill Collins looks at class, race, gender, and combines in a way that makes it difficult to actually separate the distinct effects. So it's hard to say if differences in family life are due to these three because they're so intertwined. African Americans, Latinos, and women of all races are more concentrated at lower income levels and ethnicities. So it's hard to tease that apart. And in general, family differences stem more from differences in resources and opportunities than differences in values. So if you have money and you have resources available, you're far better off than if you don't. And finally, question 6, what social policies around the world best support changing families? Social policies are super important and often what drive governments. They include the fact that most Europeans can build their families without worry about healthcare or educational access. So the social policy of, for example, universal healthcare has a profound effect on whether or not people build families. So in the Scandinavian countries, it's not as big a concern as it might be in the United States, where you have to provide your own care. In the US, they lag far behind many post-industrial societies in adopting social policies that support new family forms. So, for example, in Sweden, people are guaranteed health care throughout their lifetime, which includes care in old age, especially if you develop some kind of dementia. That's not the case in the United States. So maybe at some point, social democracies will build in some of these supports, like we have in the United States, including Medicare.